media and the creator and host of the action sports podcast, Looking Sideways, Matt Barr. Matt,
hello.
How are you, man?
Mate. I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good, thanks. How's everything going? Whereabouts are you at the moment?
I am in my shed in Brighton, which was hastily co-opted into a home office, basically. When it became apparent we were going to be working from home for the foreseeable future. So yeah, just at home in Brighton, just end of a work day, pretty average day really today.
And how's it all going in the UK at the moment? It can there was an announcement, wasn't there, like yesterday? Was it, or was it on Monday?
Yeah, there was. I kind of stopped following the announcements, to be honest. But people are pretty stoked. I think there's an air of like, okay, we got through the winter, and there's obviously it's well told that the vaccination program's been really successful over here. Yeah. So I've got I haven't been vaccinated yet, but I'm hearing like more and more friends that have been vaccinated, and you can now see people, you can go to people's houses and hang out in the gardens. I think the pub's open next week, which obviously for Brits is a big deal. So I think spirits are quite high at the minute. I think I'm kind of expecting it to be another year of like no foreign travel, really. I would have thought, but we'll see. Who knows? I mean, I think we've all learned, haven't we? Don't want to try and predict what's going to happen with this situation. So I think everyone's just going to be quite happy to be out of the winter. It's like the bleakest winter of certainly my entire life, I think. Just because, no travel, nothing you can't see anyone, you can't go out. It's just pretty grim, Yeah. So never been happier to see a spring, let's put it that way.
Have you been getting outdoors at all, or like going surfing or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really lucky because in Brighton, we've got the beach, we've got the South Downs, like really close. So yeah, I've been out a lot. I mean, I surf whenever we get waves here, which is actually quite frequently. In the winter, we get waves every week, really. Sometimes it gets all right as well. So yeah, I've surfed a lot. I get out to the Downs. I mean, I've got a dog, so I'm walking my dog 3 times a day. So I've been out a lot, which has been a lifesaver, to be honest. So yeah, I think the experience of having lockdown somewhere like Brighton is probably quite different than if you're, in a flat in London or Manchester or whatever. I think it's probably quite a lot more challenging. So I've been counting myself pretty lucky for that, really.
Yeah, I found that. I mean, like we're over in Portugal, and they, at the beginning, all the beaches were banned. You couldn't go surfing, so kind of like dusted down the mountain bike, and that kind of kept me sane. You kind of get completely away from it, and get out in nature, and that was like definitely a godsend. So
yeah, I mean, it's great. I mean, I didn't really know where I live in Sussex that well, really. I realised until the start of lockdown, and we spent a lot of time walking. There's a little spot near us called the Ada Valley, which I'd never really been to. We spent a lot of time, walking there, which is really beautiful. It's like 10-minute drive from my house. So yeah, it's been a lot of those little plus points of this. I think that everyone's experienced, haven't they? Kind of seen their surroundings with like a fresh perspective, which has been certainly true in my case, and it's something I've really appreciated, to be honest.
Yeah, nice, man. Okay, well, I'd love to take it back to where you got into action sports and board sports, because you grew up in Manchester, is that right?
I did, yeah. Not lived there for a while now, though, but yeah, I was brought up there, yeah.
And was it skateboarding that you kind of got into first before the whole snowboarding thing started, or like, what happened?
Yeah, skating first. Yeah, probably quite a common story. How did I get into it? I met a group of friends, really, who were into it, and just got hooked straight away, like I think we all did, really. Yeah. So this would have been 1989, 1990. And just super all in, immediate like avid consumer of all things skateboarding, magazines, videos. So that kind of set me on the path, and I was really lucky to meet a group of friends who I'm still friends with now, who were a little bit older than me. At the time, were a couple of years older than me, which when you're 13 is like a big gap, isn't it? So they kind of seemed like they had it pretty dialed. They were all really good skaters. They were all into snowboarding. So kind of like followed them really, and like had an immediate group of friends that were like super into it, and then got into like the Manchester skate scene, and yeah, kind of went from there really.
Nice. And then like you were studying at Sheffield, right? Was there anything like did you go straight there after school, or
Yeah,
what did you end up doing?
yeah, I did. I went to university when I was 18 because I was always like super into writing, and I was
Yeah.
sort of English lit geek. So yeah, I kind of always wanted to go to university. It was also like just a pretty good way of getting out of Manchester, which I was very, very keen to do when I was 18. Like anyone, you just want to leave your hometown, don't you?
Yeah.
So yeah, I went to university when I was 18. Didn't work hard at all. Pissed 3 years up the wall at university as you do when you're 18. And then like I got like my first gig as a journalist when I was at university. So these friends that I described, they were all quite good snowboarders, and they all started getting coverage in like the UK mags at that time, like Whitelines and Snowboard UK. Because even back then there was quite a vibrant little media scene in the UK, as I'm sure you remember. And yeah, they were being interviewed, and they asked me if I'd write the interviews for them, basically. So I did that, and that was like how I got into it originally. So that was the first one of those I did was when I was probably 19.
Okay.
When I was going into like my third year at university, and then so that was for Snowboard UK, and Eddie Spearing, who's a guy that was running Snowboard UK and was like a bit of a father figure for the UK industry at that point. He was just like really encouraging to me. He was just like, oh, this is really good. Do you want to do any more? And then I think he recommended me to Whitelines. So then I did some stuff for Whitelines, and it kind of went from there, really.
Yeah, and then when did you sort of take it from like just doing article, well, just kind of like doing a few features and interviews, to then sort of getting more involved with Whitelines? And
yeah, that was when I left university, and that was all to do with my mate Chris, really, Chris Moran, who's one of those kids that I met when I was younger, who I went to the same school as Chris, and he was just a bit like, oh, we should just tell them that we'll be their full-time staff, and I was a bit like, oh, what, can you do that? Because they were like trying to run the whole thing from a shoestring budget, and the pitch we made to him was like, well, just give us your budget and we'll just do the whole thing for you. And at the time there was only like one lad, really, a guy called Chod, another like proper legend of British snowboarding, really, who was running the whole thing. So I think from his point of view, it was like, yeah, actually that's going to save me a shitload of work. And they paid us peanuts really at the time, but we didn't really care because our plan was always to go and do seasons. So for us it was just like a really wicked way of like getting away, doing something around snowboarding. I got to write, which is what I wanted to do. So yeah, it came from there. So we did, the first winter we did doing that was like 97, 98. And we had a chalet in Maribel, and we did the whole magazine from there. We handwrote and faxed everything, which goes to show how long ago that was. And then the year after that, we scraped enough money together to get a computer. So we had like one laptop, and that was just when people started getting email addresses.
Yeah.
And that was like starting to transform publishing in the media. So we kind of like could send everything electronically at that point. But yeah, so we did that I ended up staying at Whitelines for 9 years, I think, and did like, there was a big bunch of mates. It was me, Chod, Chris Moran, Ed Lee, Nick Hamilton. There's a few other people around as well. James McPhail later on. And, between, especially like me, Ed and Chris, between us, we did everything really. We kind of like, I think we've all claimed editorship at various points, and kind of, we just did the whole lot. So between us, I kind of did every sort of role that you could get on the editorial side at the magazine, really.
And were you all living together over in Maribel at that time, or with like some of the guys based in different resorts?
Yeah, like Nick was traveling, because he was obviously shooting. So because his responsibility was to basically get the content for an entire season. So that required him to be on the road. We were away. We had a base in Maribel first few seasons, and we had bases in Chamonix. But we traveled a lot. But then after that, I think I did like 3 seasons in Maribel, 2 seasons in Chamonix. But then I did about 5 traveling, really. Like, that was kind of when I became more officially editor, when Ed left. Because that was when Ed's sort of TV career started taking off. So I sort of took his putative job, you know. And yeah, I just decided to travel because you just needed to be out and about, you know. And also, to be totally honest, like, it was, you know, it was a bit of a blank check to travel. It was like, you know, we were very lucky, you know. We got to basically we used to have a meeting every July where we would sit and plan the next season's magazines, and we would literally go like, right, where should we go this year? And I was super interested in going to as many weird countries as possible to go snowboarding. So, you know, over the years, I went to like Iran, went to Lebanon, went to Uzbekistan, went to Russia, went to like a lot of places that you wouldn't really consider to be snowboarding destinations. But I don't know, I just thought, well, when am I ever going to get a chance to travel in this way? And you know, going back to like the same French resorts, the same American resorts, which was an amazing privilege, don't get me wrong, but it seemed a bit underachieving with the kind of opportunity that we had. You know, it was obviously like a real chance to sort of see the world, really. So we did. And I actually apologized to my old publisher when I saw him at ISPO about 3 years ago. I hadn't seen him in about 15 years. And we did sort of leave at the time, I can't even remember why, but it was all a bit fraught when we left. And then as I got a bit older and thought of this bloke, you know, desperately trying to keep this magazine together, and then here's me like submitting an expense claim for the trip to Iran that I'd done. I was a bit like, yeah, we were a bunch of absolute piss takers, really. But, you know, I think it made the magazine what it was, because we were trying to just sort of show, yeah, you know, when you do something like that, you've got responsibility to like represent the culture of snowboarding. Clearly, you've got a responsibility to the industry as well, because you're representing, particularly those Brits. You know, we felt really proud, and we felt like representing British snowboarding culture and industry was a really important part of the job. But equally, I just felt it was really important to show that there was more to snowboarding than just, you know, that well-trodden path, if you know what I mean. So yeah, it was a really halcyon period. I think we all look back on that. That was like my whole 20s, basically. And I think, you know, the 5 of us that were involved in that, when we look back now, are a bit like, yeah, I was pretty lucky, because you know, you just can't, that doesn't exist anymore.
Now, right? Yeah.
No, you couldn't do it now.
And were you looking at it like, what are the most unique experiences you could have when you were kind of planning those trips and looking at the, you know, like the next issue of the magazines? You're thinking, okay, like, this is what we should do, and this hasn't been done before, or it would be cool to do, you know, something a bit different. Kind
of all those things, really. You know, for me, just generally, individually, snowboarding, skateboarding, surfing, you know, they're kind of literal and metaphorical vehicles, aren't they? You know, like they if you do any of those things, you are a traveler, really. You know, especially if you're a Brit. Skateboarding less so, but if you're a surfer and a snowboarder from the UK, you have to travel, really, if you're at all serious about it. And I just realized, like, quite quickly that was the part that I kind of enjoyed the most, really. You know, obviously the act of surfing, snowboarding were things that I was really passionate about, and still am. I mean, I still surf every week, you know, 20 years later, still snowboard 8 weeks a year, 20 years later. Skating, not so much, because it's a familiar story. But I think I just realized that was the thing I liked about it, the fact that it could take you different places. Yeah. And that made a more interesting magazine as I saw it.
Yeah, no, definitely, man. I started at Factory Media. I think it was like 2 years after you left, and I interned there, and it was kind of when they were selling DVDs. So I was kind of selling DVDs and then started doing classified ads on Whitelines and on Sidewalk. And I just remember being stuck in this office in London and then speaking to the editors who are just all over the place. There's like the surf editor over in Hossegor, and there's like, like the onboard editor who'd be he'd be in Austria or Munich or wherever they were traveling, and I was like, man, like that's definitely kind of like looking back on it, like if you could have that job and then sort of do something that you're kind of interested in it and travel around. I mean, that was like in your 20s, that's ideal, right?
Yeah, and I give full credit to my friend Chris, really, because like I said earlier, early on it was definitely his vision that like I definitely wouldn't have had the confidence to have that idea. He kind of like saw that opportunity that presented itself, and I don't really think that the people at the mag kind of, it's not like they advertised for that. It's not like they said, hey, we need someone to go and travel and do all this, Yeah. Chris and Ed as well, and Nick, full credit to them. They kind of created that thing, really, because they were all, just had the confidence to do it. Just be like, yeah, we could do this, and I was a bit like, wow, yeah, let's do that. That sounds rad, So, but yeah, just like I say, when I look back, I feel very, very privileged. Like everyone in the 20s, I didn't really realize, just thought it was like, yeah, I'm just going to go and do this, But looking back, it was very, very fortunate.
And what happened when you sort of came to the end of it? Like, did you think that you kind of wanted to do something yourself, or
like? I think, yeah, it reached a bit of a. I'd been doing it, like I say, I think it was like 8 or 9 years. I can't quite remember.
Yeah.
And yeah, me and Chris just decided to do something different, really. Things had changed in the industry and at the magazine. There was definitely less leniency to our antics, let's put it that way. And, it just became apparent that it was a good idea for us to move. And also a big catalyst of that was that the publisher at the time just really wanted whoever was going to edit the magazine to be based in England, and was pretty much like, yeah, you've got to stop doing the traveling. And we were just a bit like, well, we're not going to do that. That's like, we don't want to do that. And also we don't think you'll get the same thing at the end of it. So that, all those things led us to kind of leave. So we set up the agency, the company that I've still got now, All Conditions Media. That was in 2005. And, like when I was working for Whitelines, and at the same time I was like developing a career as like a freelance journalist as well. So I was doing a lot of writing for newspapers and magazines around the world about action sports and also about travel. I did a hefty stint as a travel writer for like national newspapers and stuff, because what I would do is I'd go and do these trips that I've described, and I'd also sell non-snowboarding stories to the national press, because again, no one was really doing that. So I kind of had this dual career as a travel writer going on as well. And yeah, we were also working with brands, like, because I didn't really recognize it as like marketing even at that point. But basically brands all wanted to work with us and the magazine, and all, and also wanted to communicate to the audience. Obviously we had a bit of a direct line to, so we were already doing loads of work with brands. And for us, especially me and Chris, that we used to call them the cash cows. When they came along, we would just be a bit like, all right, some fucking random brands come along and are throwing money around. And at the time, again, like probably naively, we were a bit like, all right, cool, well, we could do this for them. And we were also quite driven by a sense of purpose, which was that we very, very strongly felt that the cultures that we were into needed to be represented in the right way. And I think, this is actually something that I wrote on my LinkedIn bio recently, but that is the thread that kind of links everything that I've ever done, like actually being serious about representing the cultures of action sports in the right way as I sort of see it, like without being a guardian, but like I'm more talking about from mainstream appropriation, because like when our cultures hit the mainstream, obviously the things that are great about them get diluted. That's, we all recognize that. And as a journalist and as somebody that was, I just saw that every day, like, so, and it used to do my head in, used to really wind me up, so like when it was working, and it still does wind me up, to be honest. But when, when I was working with brands, or like And when we set up All Conditions Media, that was kind of that was what we were selling, really. It was a bit like, well, no, actually, we do know this world, and we do come from this world, and we do know it better than anybody else. And yeah, we should be doing this, because if we don't, then, you know, you're going to get a bunch of idiots coming along and just, you know, representing the things that we're passionate about, and that we've spent our lives basically immersing ourselves in and being passionate about. They're going to represent those cultures in the wrong way. And to be honest, that's still the premise of All Conditions.
Happens, right?
But that's still what we sell at All Conditions Media, to put it crudely. You know, like, because now the agency, we've been going like 16 years, and, you know, very lucky to work with some amazing brands and work on some amazing projects. But that's kind of the deal. Like, you know, if we're going to work on something, we want to do it in a way that is mindful of that scenario that I've just outlined, really. Because, you know, like, the cultures, they're just constantly changing, and as they grow more and more popular, that thing that makes them unique, I'm not saying it needs protecting, because I don't think that they should be static, but there is a mindset at the heart of all this, which is different from mainstream sporting culture, I believe. And I think you just have to be aware of that, and you got to be mindful of it, you know. So I think that's something that I'm still pretty passionate about with the work that I do.
And I mean, like, when you guys started off, you were doing freelance writing, weren't you, as an agency, and then it kind of moved into sort of more like other marketing projects. I mean, are there any things that you guys are sort of focusing on now? Is it sort of how like the landscape's evolving, and, you know? I
mean, that's a really good question and good point, because like you're totally right. I mean, when we set up All Conditions Media originally, you'd call it a content agency these days, but no one called it content then. You know, it was, so we were producing copy, we were producing concepts, films for brands, you know, like what you would call a content agency now. But I think the landscape changed so much and evolved so much that you had to adapt. And, you know, you run a business, you'll know this, like, a lot of running a business is understanding like where the change is coming and how you can stay on top of change, especially if your business is in the kind of cultural area that we work. You know, you have to be mindful of that, and especially, you know, as a journalist as well. I mean, you know, obviously journalism changed like irrevocably in like 10 years. Like the idea that you could have a job as a journalist now is just so different from what it was 20 years ago. So like, the company has definitely evolved and gone through different iterations over the years as we've kind of like tried to stay on top of that. These days, we help brands with marketing strategies. It's kind of that simple. It's not the sexiest thing in the world, but essentially, I mean, it can be when you get to the creative end of it and the campaign side of it, which is obviously the thing that everybody enjoys and is passionate about. But really, what we try and do for companies is just make sure they've got a proper plan. You know, like, we get approached by a lot of companies, a lot of brands who are like, I mean, you can put them in two camps, really. You've got like the established brands who we're super fortunate to work with. You know, we work with Adidas Outdoor, we work with Arc'teryx, we work with Dana, just to give you like 3 examples. You know, you work with those brands, they know exactly what they're about, they know exactly what the plan is, and they know exactly where an agency fits into that plan. So our job in that scenario is just to kind of understand their strategy and then work out how we can help them push that out through different channels. But a lot of the brands that we work with don't actually really have a plan, and don't really sort of know what they're trying to achieve by working with a marketing agency. So we always basically start with like, what is the goal? What are you trying to do? You know, like, why do you want to work with an agency? What's the point of this? You try to build your brand up, you try to sell more product, you try to launch a line. Is it about an athlete? Is it about a story? And then, like, what's it going to do for your business? Like, what is the point? Like, you know, is it like a kind of vanity thing? Is it somebody in the company who's just decided this is what we should do? Do you want to sell the company in a few years? Do you know what I mean? Like, there's always, you got to like boil down to like what that business reality is, and then work out how marketing is going to serve that. And then once you've kind of worked all that out, which is always the early stage of the relationship that we have with the brand, then it's like, okay, cool, we get it. So this is what we would do. This is the plan that we would put in place to help you achieve that. And these are the different channels that will help you do that with as appropriate. Because over the years, we've done everything. We've done PR, we've done content, we've done social, paid media, work with ambassadors, like every conceivable like type of marketing activity you can do. But obviously you got to find the right mix for each project. So, common thing we get is like, hey, we need a PR agency, like, or we want like you to do the social thing, or we want an influencer campaign, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
I always be like, do you really, like, what's the point of that? Like, why do you want to achieve that? And quite often what we find is that people need help to understand that actually they actually need something different, and you can get them to where they want to get to, but it's going to take a while. It's going to take a considered plan and time frame tied to sort of proper objectives. Like I say, it all sounds quite dry putting it like that, but that's just the reality of how these things work. And from my experience, and I kind of sort of feel like I've earned the right to know how this world works now. That's when you get successful work, and and hopefully good, honest work. Because if you don't work all out, then you're probably not going to have a successful outcome, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just about being honest with them right at the beginning, and then pushing back if you don't think it's going to be an idea that will work, if they come with suggestions. And
well, it's a trust thing. Ultimately it's not even about that. It's just about establishing trust. It's about like, you got to earn the right for someone to listen to you, whatever you're doing. Like I could, you could sit there and say, no, that's wrong, but you've got to explain why. And you've got to, like, again, like, if people come to us with an idea that they want to work with us, that's a huge privilege, really. That's a huge compliment, and that's something that obviously we want to take really, really seriously. But when you take all these things, that process that I roughly outlined, the kind of cultural thing that I talked about earlier, and how that all fits together, I think those are the considerations that kind of we're looking at when we do the work as the agency, really.
Mm-hmm. No, nice, man. And now looking at looking sideways, when did you like when did that come about? When did you think that you wanted to produce a podcast? And you've been interviewing people for years before that, right? Like when you were working with all the magazines, and so did you just think, was it an idea like way before you started it, or how did it happen?
No, I had the idea about a month before I did it, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, you know what? It was just one of those ideas I was quite fired up by. I kind of just had the idea over one Christmas, like Christmas 2016, and I don't know. I just thought, yeah, that's actually a really good idea. Like, I'm gonna do it. Like, and I was quite daunted by the whole thing, because there's a lot to sort of learn about the mechanics of podcasting, as you'll know.
Yeah.
But I just got pretty fired up by it. I just thought, yeah, right, okay, yeah, fuck it, I'm going to give this a go. So I just booked like my first 3 guests within like a few days. I just been lucky enough over the years to like get quite a big group of people that I know and work with in the industry. So I just asked a few people if they'd be up for it straight away. I kind of called my own bluff, and arranged the interviews. So I was like committing other people's time. Couldn't really back out at that point. So and then I just it was also an opportunity to do something which wasn't bound to all those considerations that I've just outlined. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, because I was really passionate about doing something that was just for me, and I could just completely decide what to do as it pleased me, which was a big part of it for me, really. So I did that, and then put the first one out like February 2017, I think, 4 years ago, and just kind of went from there, really.
And now it's like over 150 episodes, right? I mean,
yeah, I think I've actually done about 180, because I just put out 152 yesterday, but then I've done about 20 episodes of the Type 2 podcast that I do with Patagonia.
Okay.
And then I've done quite a few bonus episodes. So I think really it's probably like between 170 and 180 episodes. Yeah, which has gone pretty quick, really. seems kind of wild. But yeah, I've been like, you know, very, very gratified really by the whole experience, like by how much I enjoy it, and also how much other people seem to like it, which has been great, you know.
And when did you do that trip to California? That was that 2018, 2019?
That was 2 years ago. Yeah.
Okay.
I think like pretty much exactly 2 years ago. Yeah. So I did a lot. I mean, again, when I realized that the podcast had legs, as it were, and I was like, oh, right, you know, there's actually a bit of an audience developing here and people are into it. I just immediately started planning a few trips because, you know, I was like, oh, well, I could do some trips here. Pretty much the same thought process that went into those Whitelines planning meetings, you know, that I was describing earlier. So, and, you know, my friend Owen that I've just done this book with, who's somebody that I work really closely with on the podcast, one of my best friends, somebody that like I really, really like working with. He's like a photographer, a director, designer. He's like super talented, and we just really like each other's company. We always like working together. We always like traveling together. So I said to him, like, should we do a trip to Ireland and you can come and take pictures, and I'll do a few podcasts, and we'll just go and stay with some mates basically, because we've got quite a few friends over there. So we did that, and that was a right laugh. And people, and I kind of themed that as like an island series, and that went down really, really well. So then we went and did another one the year after, which also went down really well. So then I was like, oh, well, we could try and do something like proper here, you know. So started planning that about a year before that California trip, because it was quite a mission, you know, and I had to get a lot of people to support it. So I worked with the tourist board pretty closely. And like got like a car hire company to like sort us out car and stuff like that, so we could try and keep costs down, and came up with this plan to so I flew to San Francisco, and then I drove up to Tahoe and did a load of podcasts around there. Went snowboarding with my wife actually, which is super fun. So I think I did like 5 episodes up there. Then we went down to Ventura and met Owen there with his wife, and then we traveled to San Diego. I think it took like 10 days.
Okay.
And I think we did about 15 episodes in those 10 days. Yeah, it's quite punchy actually. It was a lot of work, but it was really good fun.
Yeah, especially if you're doing research. Were you kind of like doing that before you left, or you were sort of doing that, you know, like before you would be doing?
Yeah, that's
doing
funny.
The episodes, you're kind of like.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty punchy. I mean, doing the podcast, like early on, I did loads of research, and I still do a lot of research. But early on, I would like, you know, properly do loads of research, have like massive list of questions that I'd kind of refer to. And I kind of realized that over the years of being a journalist, I had actually developed like a bit of a muscle, like unwittingly, like about doing these things. And that actually, I just learned to trust myself. I didn't really need all these prompts. Like I could have a conversation. And if I'd done enough background reading on the person and the topics, then I could generally like plot the conversation quite well and get what I wanted to get out of the person. And, you know, so when it came to California, it sort of pushed that to the limit really, because there wasn't really time to, excuse me, to sort of prep properly. So the way it panned out was essentially Owen would drive to the interviews while I basically crammed on my phone. And then I'd drive back from the interviews while he did pictures, essentially. So it was pretty hectic, because there was a few of them we were doing like 3 in a day. So we'd be up at like 6, you know, and then do that 3 times a day. So we were both pretty fried by the end of it. But then equally, that was sort of also the point, you know, of doing it, just to do something that was a bit, just to sort of pack it all in, you know, while we could.
Nice. And is volume 1 of your book, so is that just about that trip, or is it about like the whole kind of sort of episodes that you've done up until you wrote it? Or
no, it's about the trip. Okay. So I mean, you know, Owen is, so when we were on that trip, it's funny, I was actually writing about this today because I was writing a blog about this. yeah, like when we were doing back and forth up the Pacific Coast Highway, you know, we talked a lot about, you know, a lot of time in the car to talk about what we were doing. And we were always like, because he was quite frustrated by the schedule that I'd come up with, you know, and he was, because we, you know, we, like I say, we'd be doing these interviews and he'd have like half an hour to do pictures really, which is obviously not a lot. And he was definitely finding that quite stressful. But in hindsight, those restrictions, I think, made the work that he came back with what it was really. Because the photos that he came back with from each of those sessions are like pretty remarkable, really, like how he's managed to capture this, you know, the people, the spirit of the conversation and the spirit of the person. I mean, he's just a great photographer. Do you know what I mean? That's what a great photographer can do. So he was like quite frustrated, and he was a bit like, fuck it, imagine if we had more time. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, we had a day with these people, could do a film, could actually go skating with them, go surfing with them. And I was a bit like, I mean, you know, we are who we are. We're lucky that we've got 20 minutes with them. Do you know what I mean? Like, but we sort of talked a lot about that, and we said, well, if we came back, you know, we should bring a cameraman, we should film everything, you know, we could do behind the scenes sort of like vlogs, if you like, where we follow the people up, you know, like we spent a day with Herbie Fletcher in his studio, like half a day, watched him paint, you know, like it was an amazing day. And he showed us all around his kind of compound, you know what I mean? And we were like, fuck, if we had a filmer, you know, we could have got something so good out of this, like gone surfing with him. But obviously that wasn't how it happened. And so we were like, you know, if we come back, we can do that, we can do the podcasts, and then we could do a book. You know, like we could tie it all together with a book, like that'd be brilliant. And then when like the book was all quite, it wasn't planned off that trip. You know, it was when we got back and I saw all the work that Owen had. He had just had this massive, amazing material. And I was like, we should do a book. Like, you know, your work is like so good, and why not? Let's try and do it. So I ended up speaking to the tourist board, the California Tourist Board, who'd essentially like paid for our trip, because, you know, they were getting this amazing coverage. So they were like, yeah, we've got some budget for that. It's just, again, that's how that world works. Mm-hmm. So I went to them and I said, like, you know, we're thinking of doing a book. And they were like, oh, well, how much money do you want, basically? So I was like, great, you know, we need this much money. And they were like, wicked, like, let's do it. That was the last meeting I had before COVID. And then like March last year, obviously it all kicked off. Everyone stopped traveling. They were like, you know, we can't do it. Sorry. I was like, okay, fine. Obviously, you know, the world's gone to shit. It's probably quite far down your priority list. And so we just, like, Owen basically just did a version of the book. He just kind of sent me this PDF one day, because he's an art director as well. And he's like, oh, I've banged this together. And I get this PDF. It's like this 250, 60 page, like, you know, photo book. And I was a bit like, okay, wow. So we but we didn't, what's been really fascinating about the whole thing is creatively, like, you know, we didn't have a plan. I've been lucky enough to write all the books in the past, and you start with a plan, you know, like, you're going to write this, here's your flat plan, here's what you map it out intricately before you do it. We just didn't do that. So what we ended up doing was do a version, look at it, kick it around, you know, and then go, okay. And as we did that, we kind of realized, actually, we could make this about California and Californian action sports, because as well as our podcast and the trip, because really what we've done is we've come back with a perspective on California and Californian action sports culture, whether we kind of realized it or not. And when we kind of realized that, then we decided to get contributors in to write essays about like different parts of California and their careers. And so it kind of developed from there, really. So now it's like it's primarily a photo book, like a large format photo book, which kind of maps the journey. Then we've got like extracts from all the interviews that we did with everybody with all owns like beautiful photography. We've got essays about each of the people that we interviewed from different contributors. I've been super lucky with that. We've got like Jeff Johnson wrote us a piece, Chaz Smith, who does Beach Grit, Rob Machado wrote us a piece. You know, I kind of like went through the old Rolodex of every writer that I wanted to work with. I got Ben Powell, who's an old friend of mine from Sidewalk, got him to write a piece. Ed Lee wrote us a piece. we kind of built it out from there, really. Like contacted Dibby Fletcher, Herbie's wife, and said, do you want to write a story for the book? She was like, yeah. So it was really great. So it kind of came, you know, from that initial beginning, we've ended up with this, this like really, really lovely kind of multifaceted piece of work, really, which I think we're both pretty stoked about.
Nice one, man. And have you been thinking about like what's next? Would you do like another road trip? You could do a Europe one, for example. You kind of do like
yeah. I mean, yeah, definitely.
I think like going from like
I mean, I've already spoken to California actually, and I think they're pretty up for it. And I've already picked.
Okay, so what you would go back to California,
or it's kind of endless, really. You know, we could do. I mean.
And so with
I mean, we could do like I chatted to them about that, and they were talking about. I think we're a bit synced out, aren't we?
Yeah, a little bit. That's it. We're back.
There we go.
Yeah. So you were speaking to California, about potentially going over there again, or?
Yeah. I pitched them the idea. I said, you know, that the idea I just described, like doing the films and another book.
Sick.
But I think like one of the things I do think about the book is that it is quite a traditional look at Californian action sports, which I think is fine, you know. But I think if we went back, I would take a different approach. I would kind of look for the non-traditional story of Californian action sports, which I think would give a second volume like a nice bit of legitimacy as well. You know, come at the kind of topic from a different angle, because for whatever reason, I mean, to be totally honest, like when we were doing that initial trip, like, you know what it's like trying to book guests. It's pretty hard, and you know, we were really lucky with a lot of the guests that we got.
Yeah.
But we got turned down by loads of people, you know, that we really wanted to speak to. So I think if I went back, I'd be looking to sort of tick off a few of those people and try and tell definitely some more diverse stories about Californian action sports culture. I think we've got a great mix, don't get me wrong, but I think that feels like a little bit of unfinished business, you know, from that.
Nice one. And you've also got another podcast that you run for Patagonia, which is Type 2. How did that come about?
That was a really fun experience of working with a brand, actually. So they approached me in probably about 3 years ago and just said, like, you know, look, we're thinking of doing a podcast and we really like what you do, so do you want to be involved in it? And I was interested in it because at that point the podcast had become quite popular, and from day one I'd made a bit of a idealistic stand naively about adverts. Like, I really didn't want to have adverts on the podcast. Like, my listeners are so bored of hearing about this because it does come up quite frequently. But I don't know, like I said earlier, you know, I did want the podcast to be a space for like just quite a nice creative space that wasn't beholden to like commercial interests.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was taking up a shitload of time. And, you know, I'm no different from anybody. I do want to get paid for the work that I do. So when Patagonia came along, I was a bit like, well, here's quite an interesting solution potentially to that problem. You know, if we can reach a good agreement, like, about how this is going to work, then it could be a way of financing what I do in a way that I felt like comfortable with, which had a bit of substance, you know, more than anything.
Yeah.
And also kind of had a bit of value. So, and they were super open and very just, we ended up sort of talking for about a year, you know, which was great. It was like, there was no like, look, you know, we want to do this and do you want to do it or not, or fuck off kind of thing. It was like, you know, let's develop an idea, and so that everyone's comfortable. So I think we agreed to do 3 originally to sort of see how it went, and again, it went down really well. So we carried on, and we're still going.
Nice, cool, man. And you also, I guess it's probably topical with what's going on at the moment, but with the Natural Selection Tour, you were invited on that as well to be to work on that behind the scenes in Yeah, was it picking athletes, or what were you doing there, or were you like sort of doing editorial, or?
Yeah, it was a real privilege, that one. Yeah, so I got asked to be part of the selection committee that chose the riders for the first event in Jackson Hole. So I was like Travis Rice, Pat Bridges, who's like a proper like American sort of industry stalwart, Barrett Christie, like legendary professional from the 90s and 2000s, who's like a lovely lady and absolute legend, and Liam Griffin, who's a friend of mine, who's like one of these sort of proper. I'm actually doing an interview with Liam for the podcast this week. Yeah, he's one of these like classic industry unsung heroes. He used to run all Burton's events for years. So he ran all the Burton Opens. He ran like the US Open for years, which is when I met him.
Okay.
And he's like Travis Rice's events guy. Like, you know, if you're going to do an event, Liam's your man. So it was those four, and they were looking for European contributor to help choose the riders. Yeah, and they asked me to do it. And I was fairly flabbergasted by that. And I actually said no originally, because I was a bit like, yeah, I think there's probably someone better that you can find to do this. And I wasn't trying to be like falsely modest or self-deprecating. I was genuinely a bit like, really? Like, you know, you could have picked, I don't know, just kind of, and they just kind of laughed at that. And I interviewed Travis for the podcast, and it kind of, and this kind of came up, like, and he was just a bit like, look, you just need to own it a bit more. You know, like, we asked you to do it because you've earned the right to do it. You know, like, none of us had any doubts. Like, you just own it a bit more. And I was a bit like, all right, fair enough. But they kind of ignored that, really. I just got sent a Zoom invite and was like, so yeah, it was a really real privilege, because, you know, that event is, you know, definitely the most important event in the last 20 years of snowboarding. Don't say that lightly. And I think that is completely true. And to get the opportunity to sort of shape that in any small way was obviously like an honor, really, you know, and a really great experience. A great bunch of people who were trying to do something with the purest intentions for snowboarding. You know, they genuinely wanted to create an event that would showcase snowboarding in the best light.
Yeah.
And obviously, when I kind of saw that and got over myself, I was like, yeah, I'm in. Let's do it.
Yeah, it's been amazing. I mean, like, watching that is sort of, yeah, definitely changed the game. And yeah, it's going to be cool to see what they do in Alaska when that starts. Is it like, I don't know, it's like in a week or so, isn't it? Like 16th or something like that, week and a half. Yeah. So what's happening now? I mean, like, with everything going on with lockdown, I mean, have you got any sort of plans, either work or sort of any projects that you're going to be working on for this year later
on? Well, got the less enjoyable part of creating something like a book coming up, which is the sort of selling part. You know, like any creative, it's always two parts to anything creative. There's the making bit and the selling bit. So I think, like, we've been doing loads of press for the book, which has been great, really interesting, really gratifying that people are interested in that. And then I think we're going to try and do, me and Owen have been talking about actually road testing that video, and, you know, kind of making the whole thing a bit more multi-layered with a few UK episodes this summer. You know, like, because there's obviously like great people around in the UK that we could speak to. So I think we might, we're gonna try and do that. Got a few ideas for who we could speak to. Spend a couple of days with each person. You know, do the podcast, film the podcast, do this sort of behind the scenes stuff. So I think we're going to try and do that. I'm really interested in trying to do an event. Like, I've been kind of talking about this a bit in the podcast. Yeah, I've had this idea for an event for years, which is like, do you know what the Meltdown Festival is? Like, the music festival.
Okay. Yeah.
So the music, like Meltdown, they choose a curator every year to program it. And so, like, you know, David Bowie's done it. Grace Jones did it one year. you know, like Nile Rodgers did it. It's like this super prestigious thing that you know, if you get chosen to do it, and you can just pick the acts. And I really want to do an action sports equivalent to that. So I really want to like create an event where we like choose a curator. So like, let's just say like Stacey Peralta, for argument's sake, is doing a film of Jerry Lopez at the minute. So, you know, let's say you chose Stacey Peralta as the curator. Now, obviously, he's got this like enormous body of work, connections everywhere. You know, maybe he premieres the film, get Jerry Lopez over, interview both of them. Maybe there's an art show, there's live music, like whatever it is, and kind of, you know, pick a great location where, you know, where there's surf nearby, maybe, or, you know, or maybe you could do it in the mountains. Kind of working it out right now. Like a friend of mine is somebody who was super involved with Boardmasters for years, so he's like knows the event business. So we're kind of quite seriously looking at seeing if we can do an event next year, like nothing huge, like maybe like 150 200 people, but, you know, pick a really beautiful location. We found a location in Wales that we think could be pretty decent, and like have 3 days where you kind of program this thing, and then try and do one a year, you know, where you bring in that type of caliber of curator to sort of help you run it.
I think that would be cool. I mean, like, especially because, I mean, like events haven't been running for quite a while, so people are itching to kind of have these kind of unique experiences. And yeah, like whereabouts in Wales were you thinking? Is it sort of like
found a place near Cardigan Bay, which looks great. I mean, you know, who knows at this point, we're sort of looking at autumn 2022. You know, like it kind of feels like, you know, there's no way you're going to set up an event this year, given what's going on.
Yeah.
And I think like doing it in the autumn means that's obviously like the shoulder season for most people in the industry. You know, it's the time when most people have a bit of availability. And, you know, it's a good run up to do it. So yeah, that's kind of the plan. Like we found a really beautiful sort of campsite and event space in West Wales that, you know, tentatively interested, let's put it that way.
Yeah, cool. Nice, man. Good stuff. And so what's the best way if people want to reach out to you and sort of follow what you're up to? How can they get in touch?
Yeah, like so All Conditions Media, I think it's just allconditionsmedia.com, which is the, you know, the day job work, if you like. Podcast, my website is www.wearelookingsideways.com. There's like a link to the book on there, and like my entire podcast archive. Like there's a blog on there where like old guests write stories, which is, you know, which is a really nice little thing to do. I sometimes occasionally post stuff on there as well. Nice. Pretty active on Instagram like everyone else, at We Look Sideways. So yeah, probably awesome. The best way.
Cool, man. Well, Matt, thanks so much for your time, dude. It's been great chatting to you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hope everything goes well with the book, and yeah, be cool to see what happens with the event as well. If you guys can put that on, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, nice one, man. Well, thanks for having me.
Cheers, Matt.